Oh, hey friends, I want to welcome you to our newest episode of the Healthy Christian Leader podcast. My name is Spencer and I'm a part of the team here at Ministries Network. And we're just so excited about the things God has been doing through our network and through this podcast in particular. We have seen some really cool conversations started through some of the podcast episodes we've released over the last 8 months or so, but we're heading into a new season for our podcast, and starting today, we're beginning to bring more of a conversational approach to these episodes. And so with us today, we have a very special guest. We have Pastor Chris Ivany from Rock Church, Halifax in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Pastor Chris actually is a very special person in my life. He's my boss. Yes, it's true. I'm the youth and young adults pastor on staff with him. But Pastor Chris, for those who are listening today, who they don't know who you are, they're not aware of your context, your life story, how you came into ministry in the first place, could you just share a little bit about what brought you into ministry and why you have a passion for ministry and leadership in the local church?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, good pleasure to be able to do this with you today. I am the lead pastor at Rock Church. I've been lead pastor since, I think, September of 2018. You might be able to help me with some of these dates. Previous to that, I was on staff since 2007 and actually had the privilege of working alongside of your father, Pastor Conway, when he became lead pastor in 2009 all the way through to 2018. But aside from that, I grew up in this church. We moved here when I was 10. Back in 1987, and really all of my growing up in church experience and ministry experience has been right here, and so it's interesting to see how God would use that in part towards me becoming the lead pastor here, and I, in many ways, in every way perhaps, love this church, love what we get to do, love. The opportunity that you and I get to work and minister alongside of each other, along with our wonderful staff, and just to be this part of the great big kingdom of God that's advancing all over the world. And so, I like it. Hopefully you like it too.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. It is amazing. What has been your favorite part of ministry so far since you started?
Well, we hit the ground running. You know that very well. Within a year, we felt to go to 2 services, and that was an exciting time. And then we moved into the pandemic, and it became absolutely necessary for us to be engaging in 2 services. And so, it's just been really neat to see God's hand move all through what I guess we both could agree have been challenging times pretty well since we both started, because we started essentially me as lead and you as the youth pastor at the same time. And so, little did we know that first year would be amongst the easiest year that we've experienced so far. But despite all of the challenges, to see our congregation grow, to see it grow in ways that we never dreamed possible, to see the new possibilities as the result of that and what God might be asking us to do next. So there's really lots of exciting things that God's been doing and revealing to us in real time as we just continue to move forward with the little things he's asking us to do. So it's been pretty exciting.
That's good. I think one of the most interesting things that has happened since the pandemic started is before the pandemic, at least in my role serving in the youth ministry, we got a great youth ministry, but especially before the pandemic, it just felt like it was in such a great place. And then the pandemic came and we had to start becoming acrobats, jumping between all these hoops and doing online and then back in person with restrictions and back and forth. For me, the first couple of years in ministry, it was very easy to get my eyes focused on the size of our ministry, the feel of our ministry, the look of our ministry. What is our ministry presence like online, on Instagram? What are the opportunities that I'm missing potentially as a youth pastor to get online and reach young people and build a following. I love YouTube. I love Instagram and TikTok. And sometimes as young leaders, you get into ministry and you get focused on like just growing a platform and growing your ministry, and it becomes all about the numbers and the metrics. And what's been so interesting about COVID is COVID really, because of the challenges that it's presented us, for me anyway, it put me in a position where you're basically forced to stop focusing on a lot of those external metrics that we invest so much of our attention into, and you're forced to begin focusing more small and more basic and more discipleship oriented. And that's been one of the joys that I've had through the pandemic, is it's even brought me to a place where I've even just had to go as small as just focusing on my own life and my own character and my own integrity and making sure that things are in alignment there. And so we want to have this conversation today about character and integrity and the importance of character and integrity in the life of a leader. I remember before I started as a youth pastor, I am a reader, as you know, and I was so excited to start ministry, I started gobbling up as many books as I could on leadership. And it was great, but after a while, I'll be honest, I started to feel overwhelmed because I'm reading Groeschel, I'm reading Andy Stanley, I'm reading all the guys who are they're doing great things and they're being used by God, and they're laying it all out in such digestible formats with all their points. But then you begin to compare yourself to the ideal that they lay out, and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to measure up to this. I have so many inadequacies. And a couple, pretty soon into becoming a youth pastor, this thought came to my mind one day. What's the most important thing? If there was one thing that I needed to focus on more than anything else, what should that be? Beyond all the different things. And that's not to exclude the other leadership things, but just what's most important. And so every time I found myself in circles, whether that's like at a conference or a Q&A or just getting to sit down for lunch with like a leader, I asked Bishop Tony Miller this question when he came for his one-day event. What's the most important thing? Character has been the consistent theme that I've heard a lot of the time. People say it in different ways. They put different language to it. But what's your perspective on that? How important is character in the life of a leader, especially in comparison to the draw towards influence and the draw towards building a platform?
The thing that we are supposed to believe and agree with totally is that Christ is the one who builds his church. And we know that. We know to say that. He's the only one who can draw people unto himself, right? By virtue of the Holy Spirit. We know that. We say that. We would preach that. And yet, as you mentioned, we get really concerned about metrics. And metrics matter in the sense that they do represent people. So to back to your point, just for a quick second about metrics, it is interesting how while they matter, they seem to matter much less because we don't really know what they mean anymore. 1,000 people watched your sermon on YouTube. What does that even mean anymore? 500 million probably watched them on Facebook. I would suggest you that means even less. So what do these things actually mean? And then we start to have to, and I think this is God's grace in the midst of all of this craziness, to really think like the early church thought about like actual transformed lives, right? What does this look like? How is the church supposed to act? How are we as people supposed to act? And so character absolutely is the most important thing because we're supposed to believe that it's Jesus that does all the rest of it. He does it through our lives, but he seems to only wish to work through those who have his character, right? That humble, obedient, sacrificial character that pleases him and seems to allow him to do the things that we know only he can do. And so character is vital. And I remember Bishop Miller, who we both miss very much now. I just mentioned him today. We're coming on almost a year since he's passed. which is crazy to think of. In some ways, it seems like it just happened. In other ways, it feels like it was forever ago. But he would often talk to us about character and how to look for that and to champion that in people above competency or any skills of communication or anything like that. Because as God designs it and as he sees fit, he uses, well, let's not be disparaging of you or me, but he uses even guys like you and me to do what we get to do. And we both could look in the congregation and go, oh, there's a dozen people here that could do this part better than me, and yet God's asked us to do it. And so for me, character is extremely important, and that's something that, hopefully it comes off in the staff, but that I think is important for us to talk about, to think about, and to wrestle with, because at the end of the day, in all honesty, it's the thing, if not the only thing, one of the few things that actually really matters.
Why do you think that young leaders like myself, and I shouldn't even just say young leaders, because it's probably a struggle irrespective of age. Why do you think there can be such a draw in our heart sometimes towards focusing on building a platform and building influence and putting the majority of our resources and energy into that, to the neglect of our character sometimes? Like, what is with that? Because it happens a lot. I mean, we see and we hear the stories of people who build platforms that become so big, their character isn't strong enough to really withstand it, and you start taking shortcuts and you start making decisions, and one thing leads to another, and all of a sudden it's like, dang,
I think in short, it's because it feels good. I mean, there's a reason why on social media they have the little like star or the thumbs up or whatever, the subscribe tool or whatever. You know very well, I'm not very good at a lot of these things, but it feels good. It feeds something in us, right? And what it feeds is the selfish side of us. It feeds the thing of us that's actually opposite to the character of Christ, right? Like, I can't imagine Jesus being interested in any of the things that we're talking about, and maybe even some of the metrics that you and I talk about on a consistent basis, So it feeds something in us that's truly just selfish, truly just us. And in our position, we have the, I guess, added potential blind spot of thinking of the greater good that this, if we call it a platform, that this platform can bring to the cause of Christ, because now more people are hearing about him. But really what we mostly think in these contexts is more people are hearing us, right? More people are watching us. And that's a bad place for us to be. And if we think too much about this supposed greater good, back to what you said, you will take shortcuts. You will do things that are not in keeping with the character of Christ, because in the back of your brain, and maybe even in a kind of a messed up concept that you have of it, there's a greater good that's at stake here. And so, what's the harm in maybe doing something that's not necessarily the best example of Christ's character if we get 1,000 more followers or that much more influence for the sake of Jesus? And Jesus's life, to me, was more lived in he was here for a purpose. He was here to redeem mankind. God had a plan for him, of course, but he lived that out in those small moments, right? And that's really what the Gospels are. It's all those small moments of Jesus where he taught us how to live. And so if we can kind of keep our character strong in those small moments, I don't think we'll be sidetracked by like a supposed greater good that we're trying to point ourselves towards, because that happens so much. It happens in ministry, it happens in business, it happens in the world in which we live, for sure.
And what's so ironic, especially in a ministry context, is that you can justify a a lot of stuff according
I was
to
going to
the
say
greater
anything.
good.
You can't justify everything, but you can justify a lot. You can justify a lot. And I know I use this example too much, but I'm going to use it here just because I know we're not the only two people in this conversation if people are watching this. A metric which we'll be really concerned about after this airs, to how many people watch this. But there was a company named Theranos, and it's actually, there's a court case going on, I think, right now, because at the end of the day, this company was in fact a fraud. It started off with a great intention to provide reasonable healthcare support to people, primarily in the United States, starting off, for blood tests. But everything that they promised that they could do, they could in fact not do. And in the course of that, everyone's studying that. There was a behavioral psychologist who kind of tackled it, and he kind of came up with a little bit of a study where he would put people in a situation where they could get some money for themselves. And he used a kind of the role of a dice, and I don't need to get into the details. But what he found was when people were, in his scenario, when people were throwing the dice, they were very lucky, and he asked them a couple questions. Unusually lucky, but when he put them to a lie detector test, they became less lucky, but they became very honest, because there was an outside source or outside authority, let's say, that was keeping them honest, right? And so they made less money for themselves, but they were honest because they felt, and you can tell that something's off if someone is lying. I mean, it's not usable in court, as we know, but it does work. But then he changed the game and said, now, when we can continue to play this dice game, you can make money for any charity you want, the charity of your choice. He found out people became extremely lucky, and the lie detector stopped working. So that says to me, from a character perspective, for us as ministers, as we work towards a greater good, we have to be very careful about our character and how we're being honest and living in these little moments, because even physiologically and psychologically, we can be tricked or trick ourselves into focusing on this greater good, where all of a sudden our conscience isn't even working the way that God intends it to. And so when I heard that about that study and did some research on it, it was a real sobering thing to me, like, oh, I better be very careful in how I live in these little interactions, because honesty does matter, right? Your character before Christ does matter. He's responsible for the great outcome. I just have to live the way he's asking me to live. And so that's kind of been an anchor for me ever since I kind of thought of it in those terms.
Right. The ends does not justify the means. Christ's ends require Christ's means. I think that's fair to say. But and that's what's so ironic is that we can justify taking certain shortcuts, because what greater mission is there other than to see people saved and set free by the power of Jesus Christ? But what's so ironic is that when you actually hear the stories of the people who end up making really terrible decisions that change their lives forever and cause them to lose their platform and lose their influence, it's the very people that they were trying to reach that end up getting hurt the most,
Absolutely. And that's the story that's often lost, because most people in the world enjoy a really good fall from grace story. Like it's really compelling. It's good TV. It's good, news story. It's good newspaper print, if they're even still printing newspapers. I'm not sure. But the people that get hurt, it always goes way past that one individual. There's certainly a family attached to it in many cases. But all of these well-meaning parishioners who can now only focus on the one thing, perhaps it was one thing, or the one element of someone's life that was not in keeping with Christ's character, and throw all the other things out that Christ perhaps was even doing through that person's life. It's all too muddy now. And so too many people walk away from the faith at times like that, or struggle for the rest of their lives even being able to trust someone in leadership. So those are really detrimental things that always goes way past the person who had that influence, who perhaps doesn't anymore.
Yeah, and one of the things that I always reflect upon whenever I hear about a story of somebody having a so-called fall from grace, though even as I say that, I don't even know if I like that terminology, but we won't get into that. God's grace is there.
Yeah, that term "fall from grace" that's not a biblical word.
I don't think that's theologically correct.
Phrase. No.
Yeah. Anyway, but we could call it a moral failure, I suppose. But anyway, whenever I remember these stories or hear about these stories, I often think to myself, these people, at least in a ministry context, at one point in their lives, presumably they were just like me. They were young. They were excited about being used by God in ministry. They were excited about opportunities to impact people's lives, to share the gospel with people, to do all of these things that I think we all get into ministry for. And so the question then that I start to reflect upon is, well, if they were just like me at one point in my life, and then for whatever reason, and each story is going to be different, but for whatever reason, they end up getting into this hard place. You're between a rock and a hard place. You make some bad decisions and things change for you. The question that I ask myself is, well, what's going to be the difference for me? Because I don't want my story to end the way that these stories end. I want to be somebody who serves Christ faithfully and, of course, continues to grow bit by bit over the years, allowing my character to be conform more and more to the person of Christ, this type of thing. Like, I don't want my story to end that way. So what's the difference? And so I guess my question would be, in your experience, what are maybe some of the warning signs or some of just the things that ministry leaders and Christian leaders just need to pay attention to? Maybe the oil light in your car. These are some things that you need to pay attention to make sure that you're not headed in a bad direction.
I think,
as far as your character is concerned.
Yes. So I think for me, a big part of that is accountability. And we know we're all accountable to God. And your personal relationship, I know that should go without saying, and yet I feel the need to say it. We all do. You have to have a good relationship with the Lord. And be open to certainly his conviction and his correcting. But you also need people in your life. If you ever get to a point where no one can tell you you're doing something wrong or that this is not a good idea, it's not a good spot for you. That's bad. And so I do my best to have, if I could say it, several layers of that. So outside of the Holy Spirit speaking to me, which he does, I also have my wife who speaks to me about these things. She's close, obviously, but she's a good lady of discernment. So she does help with lots of things. But then I have good friends in my life that I allow to speak into my life, even when I don't like it. And I believe, and I was going to say correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe this is not the best forum to correct me. But I even try to do that amongst the staff. Am I missing something? Can we? And I try to foster that level of dialogue where it's it's okay to question a decision I make, or it's okay to challenge my thought process on something, or if I did something wrong. We have to have that level of accountability because God uses those things to accomplish the things that only he truly can accomplish. And so if you are in a situation where everyone listens and hangs on every word you say, that they never question you. They probably question you in their heart and their head, but they would never do it out loud. If you don't have that person or persons in your life that will allow for that sober second look, you can really think that you are God's gift to this entire process and that you can only be right. And if something doesn't work, it's only because everyone else couldn't see what you see or couldn't do it as well as you could. And that produces in us a level of narcissism that only lives to produce sin in your life. Like, it just does. And so I think having people in your life that could speak to you candidly, kindly perhaps, and with respect, and all those are fine things too. But if everyone's only ever saying yes to you and that this is the greatest thing ever, you need to find some better friends, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. What about on more of like the positive side? Like, there's obviously things that we need to be aware that we're avoiding, but like, what are some of the things that you've found helpful to pursue in your life that just keep your character sharp and keep your character, in alignment with Christ? Are there any helpful habits or practices that you've adopted in the first couple years of ministry that have kept you sharp in that area?
Well, I do think, in the positive sense, having those candid conversations, but also being willing to be transparent and just to communicate. Like, be okay to say, and I think I've done it around our table, to be okay to say, I don't know how to do this, or I'm not sure what the best way forward is in this. I think, because if you can't be honest with your shortcomings, there's no way you're going to be able to navigate all of these challenges in life, So, I just remember this actually. Here's one thing I did. Of course, you were on staff because you were here with me, but as just a kind of an exercise towards my own character development, I asked the staff to do something one time because I recognize that all of us have blind spots. So do you remember when I asked the staff to write 3 things? I'm not even sure how I worded it. I'm sure I was careful. But 3 things that they might identify, or that they might see in me that, what did I say? Is a blind spot or... a
blind spot or weakness or something like that.
Right, or a weakness. And so I recognize, as a boss, asking subordinates to do that could be intimidating. So I just asked everyone, listen, let's keep it anonymous. Just type it on a piece of paper without your name on it. Put it in a white envelope and just stick it in. We have mailboxes here at the office. And I'll collect them. I think I gave everyone like a week or 2 weeks or something. And then I went through them. The level of consistency in what was identified showed me that there was areas of my character that I needed to pay attention to and to ask God's help to develop, to take on Christ's character. And so that was a really good exercise, but it only was good because I allowed myself to be vulnerable in that way, right? And so, and I talked to some of my ministry friends outside of our church that I had done that, and I was surprised how many of them said that they could never do that. It surprised me, and I'm thinking, I'm grateful that we have, and I think that I'm not the only one that's like that. I think our staff is like this. Certainly, our pastoral team, as we get together. I'm grateful to have a group that I can do that with and not be afraid. And now, I was nervous. Don't get me wrong. I sat in here with all that stack of white envelopes. I poured myself a cup of tea and just said, okay, I'm doing it this afternoon. And I opened one after the other. And I prayed before and a lot during. Said, Lord, just help me to see what you're asking me to see, because he builds us in community. That's just what he does. And so that was great, and I hope that's how you feel that you can be when we're together. You seem to have exhibited it with us whenever it's like I don't know what to do with this, or I'm struggling with this, or just even to take those opportunities to pray with one another. I think that's the best way to live, and I think that's how Christ calls us to do, and that's how we really develop character, with being okay that you don't have everything figured out all the time. Some of it's just, there's no sense pretending that you you've got all this figured out. If God's called us to work on this together so that he can work through us, then we might as well do it together. So anyways, that might have been a bunny trail, but I just remember
that's good. That's good. You have to have people speaking into your life. Now that I think about it, I'm not sure if I remembered to get my slip in, so maybe I should just take a second now just to reflect a little bit. And
Yeah, go ahead. Just say it out loud.
At the end of the I'm just kidding. I was reading a book last week called Discernment by Henry Nouwen, and I think it was a Mother Teresa quote, but don't hold me to that because I could be remembering it wrong. But it was about character, and he had the opportunity to ask, let's say, Mother Teresa about, how to continue growing in character and finding freedom from the things, that hinder us or whatever. And apparently the answer, and I'll paraphrase, was always spend an hour adoring your Lord each day and never do anything to be wrong.
That's cool.
Isn't that funny? Assuming it is Mother Teresa and I didn't screw up that quote. It's so simple, but it's like, yeah, maybe it is that simple. Spend an hour of your day adoring your Lord in prayer and worship, and just don't do... we need the power of the Spirit to help us resist at times. I'm not trying to suggest that it's as simple as that, but it is in a way. Just don't do the things that to be wrong.
I agree. And just as we've said to each other before, I'm a firm believer that your character should determine your behavior rather than let your behavior start to develop your character, because you can get involved of a lot of things that you think are good and that have these really good causes attached to them. But like Mother Teresa, if I could say it, certainly Henry Nouwen, who's a great... You ever read much of him, or is that the first one you read?
My first book I ever read by him. It was good.
Yeah. You'll get addicted. What's that? Go ahead.
I said a couple things I thought were kind of weird, but that's neither here nor there.
That's right. He's I like reading him because he's perhaps almost a direct opposite to me in personality. He's kind of artistic in lots of ways, but Mother Teresa lived her life out in those little moments. She had a great cause that she gave her life to. It's the cause of Christ, but she had purpose and mission and all those things. But most of it was like, okay, I can't pass this kid. I'm going to live in this moment. I'm sure she had a million people begging for her attention, and that could help put forward the mission and ministry that she was called to, but there was just something about that moment. And so if we cannot lose that, and I think that's the thing, even when we talked about kind of the pandemic and some of the things we're learning that are the most important metrics, it's taking time to spend in those small moments and really think about how you're living a good godly character in those moments, right? It's choosing not to lie in a moment where when telling the truth is going to make you look bad, and you tell it anyways. It's in that moment, right? And it's in that moment no matter what the consequences are moving forward. And those are tough in those moments. But there's definitely something to that. And it really kind of is that simple. Yes, the Holy Spirit leads us. Yes, we need his direction. But if we're going to spend time with him, to know his voice when he speaks, and we just be obedient, he'll put his character on the inside of us as he lives his life out through us, moment by moment, right? And then we don't need to worry about the platform. And then we don't need to worry about how many people are going to watch this when we're done, or like it, or like for us, how many people are actually going to register for church now that we're back to registering, and all these things are like, yeah, it's hard not to worry about those things, but at the end of the day, we're going to be here, we're going to preach the gospel, we're going to do what God's asked us to do, and we're going to leave the rest of it with him. And the more we've done that, we've even said it ourselves. And it's not that we're not thoughtful people and that we don't put hard work in, but we know sometimes when we do things just a little more, I'm not going to say sloppy, and I'm not even going to say last minute, but where we don't even care so much what this looks like aesthetically. It's like, let's throw out some chairs. Let's see who comes. We kind of have a plan and we kind of don't. And it seems like in those moments, the Holy Spirit moves freer than when we thought we had it all figured out and orchestrated the way that we envisioned it in our brains. I don't know. There's something about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, that's good. Well, I think that we will land the plane here. Are there any parting words you'd like to leave with the listeners of the Healthy Christian Leader podcast before we go? Any word of encouragement?
Like and subscribe. Help get our numbers up so we get over 1,000, so we get a special privileges or something. I don't know.
But I will say our platform, help us build.
Yeah, that's right. Boost our egos by hitting the like button. Watch all the thumbs down. Just rock it now.
But I actually want to say this. I think you're doing a great job, not just here, even though here, but with Aaron Ministries and everything. And I think the podcast is great. This one might not be so great, but the other ones were fantastic. And so those are my parting words. And you're a great man of character.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you very much. And to those who are listening, you guys are doing a great job too. Wherever you find yourself, guys and gals, doing a great job. Stay faithful. Keep going after Christ and all that he's called you to. And make sure that you keep a close eye on your character. Thank you guys for listening. Make sure that you subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening to it. And if you found this helpful today, share it with a friend, send it to a friend. You can follow us online. We're on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. You can find us at Aaron Ministries Network on all those places. And we would just love to have the opportunity to connect with you and to support you and hold your hands up in any way in this season of ministry and leadership that you find yourself in. So thank you guys for listening. We can't wait for our conversation that we'll be releasing 2 weeks from now with Dr. Harry Gardner. It's going to be great, and we're going to jump a little bit more into the nuts and bolts of developing character. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you guys later.